Shalom, my dear friends, Shalom and Shavua Tov from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, the holy city of Jerusalem. Today, the 23rd day of the month of Mar Cheshvan of the year 5778, the year of Aliyat Chen, the ascent of Chen, the ascent of the charm and grace of the children of Israel in the eyes of the Holy One, blessed be He. A year that already is showing indications that it will be a very momentous year. And here we are just 1 week before Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which falls next Motzei Shabbat, Saturday night, and Sunday, the one day this year of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. There are some years in which Kislev Rosh Chodesh is 2 days, and some in which it's 1 day. And this is part of the mystery of the Jewish calendar, which we will not go into now, but for all intents and purposes, we are getting closer and closer to the Festival of Light, the Festival of Chanukah, and this should fill us with inspiration as we progress from the month of Mar Cheshvan, when the lamp of Torah is kindled and burning, as in the northern hemisphere the days begin to shorten and the nights get longer and longer, and we are moving towards the month of Kislev, this profoundly hidden and deep month, the month when the lights of Hanukkah and the lights of the future menorah, as depicted in the prophecy of Zechariah, will shine. And here we are watching, as always, our international mass media confusing our minds with all of the conflicting and ongoing stories, both in the mainstream media and the alternative media. We're bombarded on all sides with stories and depictions about what's going on, be it the ongoing situation of confrontation between the United States of America and North Korea, and we see the looming monster of Iran here in the Middle East, in our part of the world, just north of beautiful Eretz Yisrael, where the north of the Golan Heights, across from east to west, is rapidly becoming the new Iranian spearhead into the Mediterranean, all as predicted in our Midrash many centuries and even millennia ago, when, as we find in the Yalkut Shimoni on Isaiah chapter 60, that if you want to know what is the sign that Melech Mashiach is really well and truly on the way, it is when Paras rises up and begins conquering nations, and the nations start falling over themselves, and the Melech Arav, the king of Arabia, goes running westwards to the king of Aram, that is the king of the Edomite nations. And we see signs of this happening in our times, with the apparent regime change undergoing its process in Saudi Arabia, with massive purges of members of the Saudi Arabian royal family being imprisoned or purged for corruption. And we do see some kind of link between Saudi Arabia, the Sunni Muslim country, with the United States of America, which now, under President Trump, after just 1 year of office, is beginning to flex his muscles and is beginning to respond to the Iranian monster together with Saudi Arabia. And the situation is incredibly interesting, incredibly fluid, and it's up to you and me to make sure that everything will go to only Melech Moshiach, the revelation of a righteous Melech Moshiach in our age, and the restoration of Israel, the crown, to its ancient glory. And I started last week discussing the recent controversy between a number of rabbis, some of them in Israel and some in the United States of America, who have come out very loudly, vociferously against two rabbis in particular here in Israel, in the city of Tzfat, Rabbi Chaim Klorfin and Rabbi David Katz, who have in recent years been promoting teachings about the ger, the stranger that dwells with Israel, be the ger tzedek, the righteous convert who embraces the Tariag mitzvot, the 613 commandments of the Torah, or be it the ger toshav, the resident dweller, the resident stranger, who, in virtue of denying idolatry and embracing the 7 universal commandments of the code of Bnei Noach, has a privileged position in the land of Israel in temple times. And Rabbis Klorfin and Katz have, as I discussed at length last week, been promoting an approach to the ger that permits the ger, the resident stranger, the ger toshav, to embrace, besides the 7 fundamental Noachide laws, which actually cover approximately 60 of the commandments. And let's recall that out of the 613, very many are not applicable in our time without a temple. But besides the 7 Noachide commandments, according to Rabbis Katz and Chlorfin, with the backing of some significant views among great authorities of the past, be they the Rishonim, the medieval rabbinical scholars, or be they in the latter ages, have been promoting the concept that the Ger Toshav may indeed embrace some of the other 613 commandments, and I discussed the very great sense of awe and seriousness with which any person should approach any of the mitzvahs, and this applies to a Jew, a home-born Jew, be it a Jew by choice, a Jew by ancestry, by ancient ancestry, be it one who feels they are an Israelite, member of the tribes of Israel, be it the 10 tribes of Israel, or any other capacity, and certainly a Ger Toshav, also one who would be counted as one of the righteous of the nations. The tremendous care with which one must study and understand what is the real intent of the commandment and how indeed is it to be practiced in the proper way, because otherwise the practice of the commandment is simply a sham. But we do find in our time, as I discussed towards the end of my discussion last week, a phenomenal crescendo in the numbers of people across the world, literally across the world, in all of the continents of the world, of people who are feeling an affinity with the God of Israel, the Torah of Israel, the people of Israel, and the land of Israel in a way that has been unparalleled in the past. We are witnessing one of the miracles that has been facilitated by the internet, because it's only within the last 25 years that people have realistically been able to communicate with one another across the entire globe, particularly in more recent years through social media like Facebook and other social media, where it's possible to encounter through the network of the computers real people living in places scattered literally all over the globe. And this was never possible. Prior to internet, the only way to communicate with many people was through broadcasting apparatuses that required immense budgets, such as the British Broadcasting Corporation World Service, for which I was a worker slave some over 40 years ago, and other major media across the world. Once only governments and organizations that had massive corporate backing were able to set up news agencies and information agencies. But the revolution of internet is that anybody that has a computer and an internet connection can really blast their message, and if they go viral, then the message can go all the way across the world. And even when messages don't go viral, the fact that we're able to organize into groups of many, many hundreds of people who can be scattered all over the continents of the world is itself a miracle. And through this miracle, particularly in the world of Judaism, in the world of the Torah, in the world of the faith of Israel, we are seeing this phenomenon that literally people in Africa, across Africa, I'm in touch with people in 11 English-speaking countries in Africa through WhatsApp. Besides people outside of Africa, there are people in the Arab Emirates, there are people in Bahrain, there are people in South Asia, people in Singapore, people in India, people in Pakistan, people in Indonesia, people in Thailand, people in Australia, New Zealand, South America, North America, across Europe, Russia, and who knows what's happening in the hinterlands of China. There is a complete revolution in thought that we're probably only standing at the beginning of now. And one of the things that is facilitating is the children of Israel to start joining hands together across the world, getting in touch with each other, communicating with each other, mobilizing. And I do believe that this phenomenon is its very, very early stages. in comparison with what I believe is to come. My own personal route to the Torah is from a state of postmodern, atheistic, materialistic paganism when I was a student up to the age of 25, which was when the first stirrings started in my heart to go back to the tradition that I had seen in my family as a child and had run away from in my teen years. And the same phenomenon had been happening for generations in Jewish communities, probably happening for generations, all the way back to the Second Temple period, when there were the schisms of the Sadducees, there were the schisms of the Samaritans, there were schisms of later Karaites, and so on. All the time there were people who were getting lopped off from the mainstream of Israel, not to speak about the many Jewish people in the last years of the Second Temple and the beginning period after its destruction, Jewish people who went to faith in Yeshua, in Jesus, that was spreading at that time. And there are probably countless souls of Israel that through these processes of assimilation have become merged in the nations of the world. And we're talking about a historical phenomenon that really makes us need to ask exactly how the categorizations of the different statuses of Israel, an Israelite, or Yehudi, or a Ger Tzedek, or a righteous convert, or a Ger Toshav, a resident stranger who embraces the 7 Noahide laws, or the concept I discussed last week, the Tinok Shenishba, how all of these categorizations are actually to be applied in the world we live in today, with the huge cultural ferment that is happening today and has been happening for hundreds, if not thousands, of years. Well, now, in connection with the Exodus from Egypt, our sages teach that when God redeemed the children of Israel, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, from Egypt, the children of Israel were practically unrecognizable then, after just 210 years of actual exile in Egypt, from the time that Jacob went to Egypt until the time of the Exodus. In just those 210 years, the people had assimilated and merged into Egyptian society. And at the time of the plague of the firstborn, when God Almighty smote the firstborn of Egypt and saved the firstborn of Israel, God alone was able to distinguish between the seed of the firstborn of Egypt and the firstborn of the seed of Israel. God alone knew who was actually Israelite and who was an Egyptian. And this is a very great importance for us to understand today, because really, with all of the theories about who can be a Ger Tzedek, who is accepted by the rabbinical courts, who is able to undergo a conversion, who is able to study the Torah, to keep the Torah, today with people across the world from different backgrounds, from different cultures, from different ancestry, coming to be stirred to the Torah, to Israel, the Torah of Israel, the God of Israel, the support for the land of Israel and the people of Israel. God alone knows which souls are chosen to be stirred in this way. When I did work for BBC World Service 40 years ago, the stirring that occurred in my soul to return to my ancestral tradition, which didn't just mean go back and join the existing Jewish community, but which meant go look into the sources, try and get to the original Hebrew Bible, and try to get to the original sources of wisdom, and attach not to the way the tradition has come to be presented in the very distorted manner of our time of exile, but what the tradition authentically is, the one which we will return to in the future. This stirring that took part in my heart was, I would say, spontaneous, in the sense that there was no specific Jewish or Torah personality that was alive, or organization, that kind of pulled me in and said, well, why don't you go back and observe the Shabbat? Without doubt, God was influencing my life at that period, back in the mid-1970s, in all kinds of most subtle ways to draw me to try to find the authentic Shabbat of the Torah, without necessarily the chulant and the streimels and the black coats and all of the outer garb of the Shabbat, but try to penetrate to its essence. And it was this that brought me to the tradition, rather than any specific outside influence, organization, person, Rabbi, or anything else. And it was only later that I began to open my eyes and to discover that there was actually so much wisdom in all of these different communities, but that one would have to make discriminations and to find a way to navigate an authentic path amidst all of these phenomena of galut, of exile. And I see in my own work, as it has developed, particularly in the last 25 years, and more specifically since the year 2000, I've seen that innumerable people that have been in touch with me through azamra.org website, through emails, more recently through Facebook and through WhatsApp and through other means, innumerable people across the world are experiencing a similar spontaneous arousal. And it's because of this that I think that standing apart from this current controversy, I think we really do need to search for the wisdom of Rabbi Nachman of Breslov on the subject of the Gerim. And indeed, in Rabbi Nachman's seminal work, the Likutei Moharan, there are numerous places where Rabbi Nachman specifically addresses the subject of the Gerim, who they are and where their souls come from, and where they're destined to go, and how they become stirred to connect with the mainstream of Israel. And a most important concept that we shall be looking at as we study some of Rabbi Nachman's teachings on the Gerim is that Rabbi Nachman fully grasped that there are two very broad categories of ger. And Rabbi Nachman does not, in his teachings in Likutei Moharan, make distinctions between the ger toshav and the ben Noah. But he does make a distinction between those gerim who do become ger tzedek and embrace the pathway of the Torah and join, or shall we say rejoin, the mainstream of Israel, because that is where their souls came from, as opposed to others who will actually remain embedded in the cultures where they live and the societies where they live, but they will be distinct from those around them in their embrace of the Torah on one or other level. And that will be reminiscent, actually, of the character of Naaman that we encounter in the second book of Kings, in the early chapters, where after an Israelite girl was captured by the Arameans, she was enslaved with a woman whose husband was the Aramean commander-in-chief, Naaman, who was afflicted with leprosy. It was Naaman, according to our sages, who shot the arrow that killed the King Achav, the evil king of Israel, who brought idolatry to the 10 tribes on a level previously unknown. And it was Naaman whose arrow, shot innocently, actually found its way to kill Achav, and set in motion the beginning of the execution of the curse on the house of Achav. And it was when Naaman was afflicted with leprosy and the maid of his wife suggested he should go to the prophet Elisha that Naaman was persuaded to go. And as we can all see in the narrative, he was, even though the prophet scarcely gave him attention, but simply waved him off and said, go and immerse in the River Jordan, a kind of first reference to a baptism, we might say. Naaman went off and immersed and indeed was cured, and he came running back to Elisha, having previously despised the little River Jordan in comparison to the great rivers of Aram. Now he came running back to Elisha and he says, I want to serve the one God. And Elisha accepts him with one qualification that Naaman has, that because he is the king's chief of staff, and when the king goes to worship in the king's private temple, the king has him by his side to support him. Naaman requests that he will be permitted to go in with the king, even though he himself does not acknowledge idols. And Elisha accepts this compromise with the surrounding society in which Naaman finds himself, and allows Naaman to take from the earth of the land of Israel to make a kind of space of worship for himself in Aram, and to continue with his life, but now as a believer in the one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Torah. And so there is this second category of one that Rabbi Nachman calls a ger, or perhaps we should say a potential ger, because the person is still embedded where they are. Now, as I've said, there are numerous teachings of Rabbi Nachman in Likutei Moharan where he speaks about the concept of the ger. Among his later Torahs, there are several most important references to the ingathering of Gerim and their part in the coming about of the Geula, the complete redemption of Israel. And hopefully we will come to those teachings in the second part of Likutei Moharan, in part 2, teaching 5, which speaks extensively about the Gerim, and likewise Torah 8 of the second part, Rabbi Nachman's last teaching, his last testament to the world, where the gathering of the Gerim is an integral part of the restoration of prophecy and the purification of the world towards the revelation of God's song of providence, the single, double, trebled, and quadrupled song. But it's in Chelek Aleph, the first part of Likutei Moharan, in teaching 17, that Rabbi Nachman particularly opens the subject of the Gerim. And it's this teaching that I would like to explore today and in coming sessions as a way then to go on to Rabbi Nachman's teachings in his later lessons in Likutei Moharan part 2. But for now, in Likutei Moharan part 1, Chelek Aleph, Torah Yud Zayin, teaching 17, the discussion of the Gerim comes in the context of a much broader discourse, which is woven of many, many themes. And the ultimate direction of the discourse is how can we bring love and awe of God back not only into the world, but into our own souls when we have become tired and we become wearied by our lives. And Rabbi Nachman begins this teaching 17, with the words, awe of God and love of God, it's impossible to receive except through the tzaddikim of the generation. For the tzaddik of the generation is the one who reveals the awe of God and the love of God. Rabbi Nachman is not saying here that one attaches oneself to any good, pious, average person, but specifically he refers to the tzaddik ador, that is the one tzaddik who is the all-encompassing gardener and shepherd of the whole generation, because each generation, all of these souls of Israel are constantly being reincarnated and recycled. That's what Gilgul means, recycling of souls. And each generation has its Moses in some garb, be it in the garb of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, be it in the garb of Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, be it in the garb of Rabbi Israel Baal Shem Tov, be it in the garb of Rabbi Nachman of Breslev. Each generation is its tzaddik, who is the one who provides the teachings that can enable us to arouse our love and awe of God. And it's in the context of this discussion that Rabbi Nachman speaks about how the tzaddik reveals the good and the glory in each and every individual. And it is also necessary for the tzaddik to find a way to peel off the outer coating of darkness and dust, the sackcloth and darkness that covers over the heavens. That is to say, the shomayim, the heavens are made of fire and water. Shomayim, sham, the word esh, shin, sham, there is mayim, water. Fire and water held together, just like the hydrogen and the oxygen atoms are held together in the water molecule. And so too the esh and the mayim, the fire and the water, these are the love of God and the awe of God that are in the soul of every Israelite, but they get covered with this outer covering of darkness. When people become alienated from their true source and separated from them. And Rabbi Nachman says that it is necessary to subdue the folly that encompasses our minds. It is necessary to overcome and to conquer the folly that enters the mind. And this, he says, comes about through the altar. Through the perfection of the altar. And elusively, Rabbi Nachman is speaking about our own personal altar, where we feed our furnace of fire with the food that we consume, and it burns energy, and this energy goes all around our systems, around our bodies and around our minds and our souls. And Rabbi Nachman says that only when we rectify the altar of God's service in our own lives through our eating and drinking and living our lives, our material lives, in a way that will bring us to holiness, only this way are we able to subdue the folly that encompasses the mind and separates between ourselves and our true fear and awe of God. And it's in connection with this discussion about the need to perfect the altar that Rabbi Nachman in section 4 of this teaching, section Dalet, comes to the subject of the Gerim. He says, in order to complete and rectify the flaw of the altar, this happens through Gerim. Because every single different kind of idolatry across the world, he says, has power only inasmuch as they are deriving nurture and sucking from the altar of God that is flawed. Just as the temple altar, if it is not functioning properly, where the altar itself is intact and the offerings on the altar are offered in the proper way and thereby draw blessing into the world, likewise in the personal altar too, if we are not modulating our consumption from the material world in a way that enables the divine sparks to rise up, there is a flaw in the personal altar, and from these flaws of the collective altar in the temple and the flaw in the individual altar in the case of each soul, the folly takes a hold. Like if a person overeats and overindulges. In some cases, their minds will get clouded over. In other cases, if they're consuming foods that are not kosher, they will engender thoughts that are not kosher. And in this way, the alien cultures will get their hold. And for that reason, it is through the Gerim who are coming out of the alien culture, out of the idolatrous cultures of the pagan nations of the world, to the authentic truth of Torah, the authentic truth of the Torah of Israel, that the altar, he says, is completed. Because idolatry gets its power from the flaw in the altar, and thus it's written in the prophet Malachi chapter 1, in every place the burning of incense and the offering of sacrifices is to my name, says God. That is to say, even though the pagan nations are indulging in various kinds of strange service to the subsidiary powers of the world and not to the all-encompassing Almighty, and all their power comes from this floor and the altar. That's why God says that actually in every place, even though people are offering their offerings and doing their services and devoting their lives to their idolatrous goals and purposes, ultimately the smoke is going up and the offering is going up still to the one God who is behind all of this, who's above all of this. Because any power that the pagan nations have comes from the spark of the holy altar that has fallen into an exile among the nations. The powers of the souls of Israel, through the sins of Israel over many, many, many generations, have fallen into the alien cultures, just as the tribes of Israel got assimilated and alienated and separated from the mainstream of Israel over the years. And it's through the Gerim, it is through those who dwell with Israel, inasmuch as each and every one of them casts away the emunah, the faith with which they grew up, and he now goes after the faith of Israel. It is through this that paganism and idolatry is subjugated, because idolatry derived its nurture only from the flaw in the altar. And when the Gerim, when the sparks come back, the portions of the altar that had got separated now return to their place and the altar is complete. Well, that's quite a mysterious and a profoundly a deep section that we've had. But it's after this that Rabbi Nachman comes into the subject of the Gerim. How can you make Gerim? I'm jumping now to the beginning of section Hey of this teaching. How is it possible to get people to turn to the faith of Israel, be it as a Ger Tzedek, a full convert, be it as a Ger Toshav, be it as a Noahide? For are they not very far indeed from the holiness of Israel? The true holiness of Israel is a holiness that is preserved by the laws of Taharat Mishpacha, the purity of the family, the purity of marriage, the purity of the marriage relationship between husband and wife through Kiddushin and through the practice of a Torah household, the practice of Israelite inbreeding through the generations. But the Gerim have got separated off into the alien nations and are very far from this holiness. So the question arises, this most interesting question that Rabbi Nachman now dissects and discusses, from where does it come about that they should get the idea that they should become Gerim? Where on earth does it from where does it enter their minds that they should turn to the Torah of Israel? And he says that actually, quite amazingly, this comes about through the teaching that comes forth from a verse in Proverbs chapter 19, which says, wealth will add many friends. A rich person has many, many friends or seeming friends all around him who are coming there in the hope that they will get a share of the wealth. And Solomon says, wealth adds many friends. And that is to say, says Rabbi Nachman, that when people give tzedakah to the Torah scholar, and I'm talking about the true Torah scholar, the true Talmid Chacham, the true sage, this sage actually has a soul that is a more general and comprehensive soul that encompasses numerous souls of Israel. And Rabbi Nachman will presently explain what he means by this. He says, in truth, it's quite impossible for the pagans to come to the faith of Israel because they are far in the extreme from Israel. So how is it possible even to speak to them in such a way? I mean, they're physically far in many places. How can we get into the hinterland of China and Russia and places across the world, into Iran and into all the other countries? How is it possible to speak, for Israel to speak in such a way that these souls are going to hear, that they will come to holy faith? And he says, well, just like when one person is very far from their friend and it's impossible to talk in such a way that the other one will hear, and Rabbi Nachman is speaking before telephones and smartphones and computers and internet. If you're trying to speak to somebody who's in the next village, they're not going to hear you, so you have to write them a letter, you have to write something, put it in writing. So too, says Rabbi Nachman, you have to send the script to them. You have to get it to these souls across the world. You've got to send the script so that they will be able to hear the message because they're far away. Even though they're far away, they will hear it. Because he says the essence of the sense of hearing is that the letters of which speech consists, the phonemes and the syllables of which speech consists, they get inscribed in the air as we use our vocal apparatus to cause the vibrations. Those vibrations, Rabbi Nachman calls them inscriptions into the air. And the molecules of air, he says, strike one another, and the reverberations of these waves of sound, it is these that spread until the other person can hear. Because the air vibrations enter the ear of the other person. And for that reason, when the air is calm and clear, then when somebody speaks, who is able to speak, who knows how to speak, then that word is heard from far away, just as if one actually saw what was being said because of the power of this, when the air is clear and calm. But when there's a storm wind, it's impossible for the other person to hear above the noise because the storm wind throws everything in confusion and separates throws into confusion the waves of the sound of the words, which get scattered to the point where it's impossible for the friend to hear what the other one is saying. You can't even hear any kind of sound, let alone the actual words. But he says that when a person gives charity, and he's talking about charity specifically to the true Torah sage who is devoted day and night, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to Torah, to devotion, not one of the fakers that sits around and is indulgent in the material world in the garb of the righteous, but a true Torah scholar. When a person gives charity to such a tzedakah, to such a scholar, that person is taking souls, he's acquiring souls, because he's acquiring many, many friends and lovers. Like we find that there was in ancient times a king by the name of King Munbaz, who was one of the righteous converts, and he was asked, well, why has he abandoned his ancestral craftsmanship of acquiring wealth, physical wealth and riches? He said, well, my ancestors treasured up money, but what have I done? I've treasured up souls. Munbaz the king, he brought souls into Israel. And the more that a person gives tzedakah to more people, through this the person acquires more friends. And through this love that the person acquires through their tzedakah, through this the air is purified. And the more people that one gives tzedakah to them, the more love he acquires with more and more people. The practice of tzedakah, where the one who has gives to the one who is in need, there's the reciprocity. This creates ahava, this creates unity through the mystery of this great mitzvah of tzedakah, for which Abraham was particularly praised because he instructed his household in the ways of tzedakah. And this love, he says, this love brings about pure, calm air, pure, calm atmosphere and environment, because love means the attaching of one spirit to another, namely the spirit of the lover with the spirit of the one that is beloved. And this spirit, this ruach, which is joined together, this ruach is the ruach, the wind, the air that is calm, where their spirits are calm and good with one another. They are comfortable with one another, because there is no bad spirit, no bad vibes, namely no hatred to separate between them. Because hatred is the category of a bad wind, a bad spirit. Like it says in Judges chapter 9, speaking about the fate of the town of Shechem, that God put a bad spirit between Avimelech and between the people of Shechem. There Rashi, the commentator, says this bad spirit is hatred. Hatred is the bad spirit which throws the air into confusion, as a result of which we can't hear one another. And this is exactly what's going on in our world today, where the party interests, the divisions, are causing a spread of hatred from one group to another, and nobody is willing to hear or listen to what the other is saying. On the other side, the love and companionship, which is the pure and the calm air, the clear air, through this, the speech is able to be heard from a great distance. And all this comes about through tzedakah. As it says in the verse quoted above from Mishlei, from Proverbs chapter 19, wealth will add many friends. That is to say, through the wealth, namely the wealth that is given, the tzedakah, the charity that is given, the person acquires many friends and lovers, and this causes the air to be purified, and the more one gives charity to more people, the air becomes correspondingly purer and clearer, because when one gives the tzedakah to one person, he has acquired one friend, and then one spirit is attached to the other, and there's a small area of clear, calm air. When one gives the tzedakah to two people, there is a larger area of pure, calm, tranquil air. And the more that one multiplies the tzedakah to many, many people and acquires many friends, as the verse says, wealth will acquire many friends, the area of the pure, calm air is ever expanded. And for that reason, he says, the main thing is to give the tzedakah to true tzaddikim and to worthy, needy people, because these are encompassed by many souls of Israel. A poor family, if one gives charity in support of a poor family, the family may consist of the father, the mother, the dependents, the children, and others, the older generation, the babies, many, many souls. And all the more so if the person is providing livelihood for the tzaddik who is devoted to the Torah, studying the Torah and teaching the Torah, then the many, many people who are the students and benefiting from that tzaddik are receiving the benefit of the tzedakah, and the tzedakah is being given to many, many people because of the creativity of the tzaddik in his teachings of the Torah. This way many, many people are influenced, and the person who provides the livelihood, the very physical livelihood of the tzaddik, which through his service, through his personal altar, through his using the material in order to fuel the spirit, through this, the air, the area of the pure, clean air is greatly expanded, because they are encompassed of so many souls. Now, when the air is then calm and pure, says Rabbi Nachman, when then there speaks the one that has the power to speak the true speech of Yisrael, namely holy speech, namely the speech of Torah, the speech of inspiration, the speech of elevation. This speech gets written and carved into the ear, like the verse says in Psalms chapter 45, my tongue is like the swift pen of the scribe. The tongue speaking the words chisels the words into the ear, which goes from ear to ear. The speech goes and is heard from afar, like it speaks in Scroll of Esther, chapter 9, of the fame of Mordechai, which went across to all of the states of which the ancient Persian Empire consisted, 127 states. And how did they get there? The words of Mordechai, because of the practice of peace and love, which Mordechai promoted, as described in the book of Esther, encouraging fellowship and love and friendship among Israel, sending each other tzedakah, sending each other gifts, celebrating, feasting together on the survival of Israel. And because the air now is pure and clear, it is possible to hear the message from far, and then the words of the true Torah, of the true tzaddik, get inscribed in the very literature of the pagans. Each and every state and country, according to its script, through the spread of the script of the words of the tzaddik, through these airwaves spreading across, the words find their way into the writings of the nations, and then in the writings of the nations, the idolaters find in their very literature the very opposite of their own idolatrous faith, because the words of the true tzaddik have found their way into their works. And says Rabbi Nachman, we find this in the case of numerous Gerim, numerous converts who converted to the Torah of Israel on account of this, on account that they found in their works the very opposite of what they were brought up with to believe. I've heard this myself from many converts to Judaism, that as Christians they were perplexed why the churches were teaching them to rest on the Sunday and to ignore tabernacles, to ignore the other festivals of the Torah, and they found actually in their own literature, in the so-called Old Testament, the very opposite of what they were being brought up to believe in it. Now says Rabbi Nachman, from where does this phenomenon come, that they should now find in their books things that actually contradict the faith with which they were brought up? And he says this comes on account of the word of the tzaddik that is inscribed and written in the ear, as the verse in Isaiah says, my tongue is like the swift pen of the scribe. And when the ear is pure and clear because of the acquisition of many friends through the tzedakah, this enables the speech of the true Israelite tzaddik to go afar, as it says in the case of Mordechai. His fame went through all of the nations, and the very words of the tzaddik are inscribed and written in the literature of the nations. And this is how it comes that they find in their literature the very opposite of the beliefs they were brought up with, and on account of this they converted to the Torah of Israel, as we've heard tell many Gerim that converted on account of this, on account of finding in their books the opposite of what they were brought up to believe. And all this comes from the phenomenon we have discussed above. Well, now, in the next section of this teaching, the next section, Rabbi Nachman will draw together some different strands of the tapestry in support of what he said so far, and then he will go off to ask, well, why is it that specific members of the nations choose to become Gerim? What is it that makes these ones, as opposed to the others who stay there, decide to uproot and come to Israel? And with the help of God, I hope that we will be able to study this next part of the teaching, Likutei Moharan, part 1, Torah 17, in our coming session as we go through our pathway of Rabbi Nachman's teachings on the Gerim. And And with that, my dear friends, as we stand on the threshold of into already the last week of the month of Mar Cheshvan, before we come to Rosh Chodesh next Saturday night and Sunday, the beginning of the new month of Kislev, the month of miracles, let us make the most of Mar Cheshvan with its opportunities to study, to devote ourselves to devotion, to Hidbodedut, and with the help of God through our efforts, each one of us, we will quickly in our time see the coming of our righteous Redeemer and the restoration of our holy temple and the spread of the word of God to all the earth until the earth will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the seas. Shavua Tov, my dear friends, a good and a blessed week.
Sharai dayu, sharai yoy, sharai hude, sharai atzuche, sharai arbu.